Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am Pastor Caitlyn Melillo. You can call me Caitlyn. That's what I go by at my job, so no need for formalities. We are going to start today with a scripture and prayer. So this comes from Mark, the 14th chapter, verses 1 through 9. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table of the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with me, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Let us pray. God of life, we thank you for the gift that you have given to each one of us, for breathing life into this world from the very beginning, from breathing life into the dust that formed humankind, and into our own lungs, which have brought us here to this time and this place. We know that part of life comes with death, and although these are hard conversations, we know that it is sacred, and that death is not the final answer, because you have sent your Son to us to die on the cross and to be resurrected, to grant us the gift of life everlasting. So as we prepare our hearts for these conversations, to look forward to the future and figure out what does planning and what does end of life mean for us and our family members, I pray that you can walk alongside us, guiding us and leading us in your light. Amen. So like I said, my name is Caitlyn. I was born here in Everett at First Lutheran. I was baptized at Faith Lutheran, not born there, baptized, although some would say I was born again there. I was confirmed at Gloria Dei in Alderwood. I attended California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, where I got a degree in religion and in art. Can you guess what I said I wanted to be when I always got that question growing up? I can tell you it was not a pastor. It was an artist, it was a teacher, it was a ballet dancer, author, you name it. I did not want to be a pastor. And yet God works in mysterious ways. I ended up at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, where I did my MDiv, ended up in Uruguay doing my internship. And along that path, I discovered chaplaincy. Before I started my MDiv, had no clue what the word chaplain was, didn't know you could work in healthcare as a minister. And yet these little steps along my way led me to healthcare work and healthcare ministry. After my internship in Uruguay, I came back to California and did my residency at a hospital in Concord, California. 6 months in, the pandemic hit. So the first 6 months of my residency, I experienced what we would consider normal healthcare. The hospital doors were open. People could come in and go as they wanted to visit their people. That all shut down quickly. I also, prior to the pandemic, was in the dialysis unit and in a step-down unit. So my 6 months were fairly easy. I was just guiding people as they're getting ready to go home. When the pandemic hit, we swapped units, and I ended up in the ICU, which, as you can imagine, quickly turned into the COVID unit. So I went from daily interactions with people who were just eager to go home. They were there for a routine surgery, to sitting with people as they're dying alone. That's what really, I think, settled for me that I wanted to be in chaplaincy. the scripture we read at the beginning, that was my ordination text. Because that line, she poured perfume on my feet to prepare for my burial, felt like what I was doing in my work. I was walking alongside people who were on this path of death. It's hard, sometimes it's ugly and messy, but it's beautiful. So I know that these are conversations that scare us. For one reason or another, we often push death to the very end. We don't want to think about it, but that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about advanced care planning both this week and next week. We're going to do a little bit more of the background work today about why these conversations are important, what do they mean. Next week, we'll dig a little bit more into the document. But as we get started, who has a will? Who has an advanced care directive? All right. Can one of you tell me what that means? What is advanced care planning?
To express what your wishes are for different situations that you might not be able to respond to at the moment.
Exactly. Yes. So advanced care planning, filling out those advanced care directives is really a way to put in writing what your wishes would be if you are ever in a state where you cannot verbalize it. It's a way for your family to understand what you want. It's a way really for the medical team to understand what you want. Because in a situation where it's may be life or death, and you haven't been able to consent to anything verbally, you're not in that place, medical teams might want to do what they can. But if you have in writing a legal document that says whole life support in A, B, or C situations, they will know how to follow your wishes. The thing about advanced care planning is that it's not a one and done. So you might have your will, you might have your advanced care directive. 5 years down the road, it could change. 20 years down the road, it can change again. It's an ongoing process that is never fully complete. So I'm going to break you up maybe by your tables. You can either do a whole group table or small groups. I just want you to, for maybe about 5 minutes, talk about these questions. What is your biggest fear when having these conversations, either with your spouse or with your family, with your friends? What are these fears that stop us from having these conversations? And when is the best time to have these conversations? So I'll give you about 5 minutes. I'll kind of pop around and hear what y'all are saying.
Yes. Well,
all right, so what did you talk about? You can 1 point or two, and I invite you, those of you who are online can also raise your hand and speak. What were some of the biggest fears that came up? Or when is the best time to have these conversations?
Well, the sooner the better, and then multiple times after.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's easier said.
I was talking, had a party last night for my sister who's 10 years younger than I am. And all the nieces were there and nephews. And we were talking about death, or talking about, well, we'll see each other in heaven. And I said, well, I come to church to pray for all of you. and then I said, the things that I've been having, I'm 88, the things that I've been having are dreams of the people that I have known over my lifetime that I have thoroughly enjoyed. And I'm so grateful that they were a part of my life. They're gone now, but I'm not sorry that, you know, I don't miss them. I just remember those things. And I think we're so fortunate to have our minds that will go back on those pleasant times that we've had with people that have passed away.
Yes. Anyone else with bigger fears? I hear you.
I like going to the cemetery.
Okay.
I really do. My daughter's there. My husband is there, and you know, some of the big loves of my life. And I just like to go up and say hi once in a while.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest fears I have discussing my wishes with the people that will care for me is that they won't listen. So I think it's a trust issue. You have to state what you think and what you want, and then you have to trust that the person is listening and will follow. And to back that up, you need to write it down.
Absolutely, yes. And more than a part of that trust too comes from the not just listening, maybe not hearing, but agreeing with it.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing in some of my conversations with people throughout this work is their wishes might be one thing, but their family is like, absolutely not. Like, we don't want to let you go. We want you around as long as possible. And so there's this disconnect in the person who is entering this end of life stage and what they want, and the family who wants something completely different. And that fear can remain from any point in that conversation. Like, I know if I were having these conversations with my parents, there might be some of that fear there because we have different ideas of what would happen.
There's a quick question from marketing.
Yeah, so to dovetail with that, my situation with my dad was that he had an unexpected stroke and we had to make a decision whether to move him to hospice or keep him on life support. And it was difficult, and this would be my fear, to have to make a decision not knowing what somebody else's wishes were. And like my mom and I decided one thing and my brother was deciding something else. So that was difficult, and sadly, he had made his wishes known with advanced life directives, but they were safely put in the safe deposit box that we didn't open until after he passed away. So, and I guess I feel like those advanced life directives don't cover everything, with the example of like, do you want to be cremated or not? So yeah, that's one of my fears.
Absolutely. Well, that kind of leads us, yes.
Oh, one of our fears was already realized when we had a family member die without a will. And that's horrible.
Absolutely. And when you encounter those situations, it can cause so much chaos within the family too. And like you were saying, that some people might be on one path and your brother and someone else might be wanting to go down another path. So the best time to have these conversations is when everyone is able to say for themselves confidently. That way, you know what to do after. And that leads us into maybe, there we go. Why do we have these conversations? And part of it is to avoid that chaos and that maybe drama, but that heartache really. Because when you're in those end of life situations, that's when you're grieving. There's anticipatory grief happening. There's grief from things in the past coming up. It's harder to make these decisions for your loved one when you're in that moment. So to have these conversations beforehand so you know what they want is really helpful for those stages. I work part-time at Children's Hospital in Seattle, and I work part-time at Bethany of the Northwest here over in Silver Lake. Two very different places, as you can imagine. I work mostly in the NICU, sometimes in the PICU, but in the NICU, I have the itty bitties, like from 0 days of birth up to a few months before they graduate to another unit. At Bethany, we've got those in their hundreds, a lifetime, a huge span of people that I work with. And it's different. People come to this death differently, especially with the parents. I don't know where you all come from. I don't know what heartaches you've had in the past, what your losses are, but the loss of a child is unimaginable. That pain, that grief, the expectations and the hopes that you've had for those children, for their future, are lost. And it's hard to have these conversations with kids, especially. A little bit later, I will note that there are some resources, so you can have these conversations with your kids. But I've experienced parents and patients in the hospital that have had conversations and have not. I recently, a few months ago, worked with a family. Their 6-year-old child had cancer from the age of 2. She had been on and off sick, but it came back when she was 5, and by the time she was 6, she was tired. She was done fighting. She was ready. She was wise beyond her years, I have to tell you that. She was an amazing little girl. And in this process, when they're in the hospital, she made it known what she wanted. She said, I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want that med. I know it makes me sleepy. She wanted her family around. She wanted to be awake with her family. That was her big thing. She wanted to play with her cousins, to talk with her mom and dad. Those were the 6-year-old child making her wishes known. So when it came time for her to pass, this room was filled with 25 people. Cousins, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, mom and dad. She loved prayer. She loved hymns. It was a space of grief, but because of who this child was and what she made her wishes known to be, it was a space of joy too. They played her favorite music. They sang together. They prayed with her. I had a 19-year-old kid who was alone. Family dynamics super complicated. So this patient was experiencing end of life on their own. Also made the wishes known. Had a spirituality, but didn't want prayer. Didn't want hymns being played. They just wanted someone by their side. Put on a few of my favorite movies. Massage my hands because I'm in so much pain. Give me as many meds as it takes to make sure I'm not in pain, even if it means I'm unconscious or sleeping all the time. So these wishes were known, and they were different. One child did not want meds, did not want to be sleepy. Another did. Now, Bethany, these conversations are slightly different because, like I said, a different stage of life. It's almost expected at Bethany. But even there, it changes. One of my recent patients, when she came in a couple of years ago, wanted to be full code. If something happens to me, do what it takes to save me. I want to stay. A few years later, just this last week, we had a conversation. She's ready. She's like, if something happens, let me go. This is what I want. I want my hymns being played. These are my 3 favorite hymns on repeat. Great. Doesn't have a whole lot of family around, but doesn't want to be alone. So it's okay with nurses, with me and the other chaplains, with other people coming and spending time with her when the time comes. It's important to have these conversations so you know. Because when you're in that stage and you don't know what they want, you might keep someone on life support longer than they want to be. You might be playing hymns or prayers when that's not what they want. Instead, they want poetry read or their favorite book or a movie, things that bring them comfort. It's also important, we're all here at a Lutheran church, we all have a Christian background. The ELCA has documents about end-of-life support or end-of-life decisions. This comes from the end-of-life decision social message, not a social statement, but the social message. And it talks about our convictions about life and about death. And it says, life is a gift from God. We know that. We know that God breathed life into this world and into us. We know that God has ordained our days from the very beginning. For that, we give thanksgiving. We also know that life and death are a part of this process. Because of that, life and death are sacred. We are very good at celebrating births. Congratulations again. We are so good at celebrating new life. It's a beautiful miracle to come into this world from a young child and grow into who we are now. We're not good about death. Understandably, it is hard, like we've already said, but there is sacredness in it. Both living and dying should be within a caring community. We see that here. We're celebrating births together. We celebrate birthdays together. This is a community that supports one another. And I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine that in times of death, when someone has lost someone, this community surrounds each other. There's a Christian mandate that we respect all life. Part of that respect is why we're having these conversations. Respecting a person's wishes who has thought thoughtfully about what they want. And we know that the truth is important, that trust is important, that faithfulness to one another and to God is important. And most importantly, I think, we know that hope and meaning extends beyond what we can ever imagine. That even in suffering, even in death, there is hope, there is meaning. We see that through Jesus. We know that we are God's. We know that we live and that we die in the name of Jesus because we are beloved children of God. And because the Lord was born, lived, died, and was resurrected, we know that we have life everlasting, that death is not the final answer for us. So that's why it's important to have these conversations. Or what can help us have these conversations. So some of you have said you have wills, advanced directives. Who has heard of the 5 wishes before? Okay, a few people. I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't until Pastor David asked me. This is somewhat new to me too, within the last few months, because I have been so used to working with like posts, with advanced directives, with more of the legal documentation. That's not to say that this isn't a legal documentation. It actually is and can replace posts or advanced care directives. All that information is in there. So the 5 wishes was created by a man who spent 12 years working with Mother Teresa. One of those years he spent working at a hospice in Washington, D.C. that she ran, and he really got to experience and see the end of life that people were going through. He got to see the disparities and the disconnect for people who may not have had their wishes known, and so in those moments had a harder time. He also got to see that often the advanced care directives, the wills, those are more legal terminology. They deal with the medical stuff, like the life support, if you're in a coma, if you're, he saw that these wishes didn't include personal, emotional, and spiritual wishes, which are important at end of life. So he created this document to help not only give information about what you want medically and who you want to make your choices for you if you can't, but really to spell out spiritually, emotionally, what would your wishes be? What do you need? What do you want at the end of your life? So the 5 wishes, next week we'll get more into this. We'll actually dig into the document. We'll start having conversations about what each wish means. But just so you know, the wish 1 is, who do you want to be your health care advocate? So, and if you're in a state that you can't make decisions for yourself, who would be your person to do so? The second wish is what kind of medical treatments you want. Wish number 3 is my wish for how comfortable I want to be. Wish number 4, I wish for how I want people to treat me. And wish 5 is my wish for what I want my loved ones to know. So again, next week we'll dig more into what all of those mean. But as we start having these conversations, it can be somewhat hard to figure out, where do we even start? These documents can be helpful, but it can also be overwhelming. So These are some questions that can help. Even before thinking about what would my wishes be at end of life, think back. Think back to what does a good day look like for you? For me, it's somewhere near the water. I'm a Pacific Northwest girl. I grew up in the rain. I grew up next to the Puget Sound. I grew up in the swimming pool. I was probably swimming before I was walking. So water to me is important. Being surrounded with my friends and family at the beach, that is a good day for me, with some good food. What brings me joy and comfort? What brings you joy and comfort? Music. Music for me gives life. Comfort, usually a cup of tea, a blanket, and my dog. What or who supports you during difficult times? My parents, my mom specifically, my best friend, one of my brothers, my faith. These are some of the things that support me during difficult times. So again, we're going to break up into small groups. You can talk about it amongst your table, or if you want, like do 3 and 3, however you feel comfortable. These are just questions that kind of prompt us into thinking for the following week, and then as we come back.
For folks online, I'll mute the classroom and you guys can talk amongst yourselves.
Great. And I'm going to come around. We're not going to come back and share these answers like we did last time. This is a conversation for your group.
Yeah.
I know that's probably not nearly enough time, but it's just really to help start thinking about these things that matter. Answering these questions help you start to piece together or pick out what is it that matters to me. Because then you can start to think about it. Thank you. Thinking about what does a good day look like for me? What brings me joy and comfort? How can that help me figure out what matters to me in the end? I want you all to go home this week to think about this question. We're not going to talk about it in our groups, but what is it that would matter to you in the end of your life? For some people, what matters the most might be being able to recognize the people that they love that are in their rooms, being able to spend time with them. It might be being independent. Once I start losing the ability to feed myself or change myself or do anything for myself, that might be it. Some people might be able to, or what matters might be doing what they love, knitting, hiking, being out on the water. My supervisor at the hospital is very open about her experience of the end of life with her dad and her mom. And she knew her dad was ready when he stopped eating. Because what mattered to him was food. His entire life, food brought him joy, food brought him life, food brought him community. So when he stopped enjoying food and stopped eating, she knew he was ready to go. So as we prepare to come back next week and really start to dig into these wishes and this document, think about, for you, what would matter most in the end? So as I said, next week, our agenda will be to go through the 5 wishes. I'm going to leave some space right now to answer any questions that you might have that have come up. If we don't get to them today, I'll include them for next week. So are there any questions that haven't been answered or that have been brought up as we've had this conversation today?
I know Pastor Deb brought in some documents. Are we supposed to?
Yes, everyone can take one home at the end of the day, bring them back next week. I'm not sure what we're going to do with those of you who are online. How are we going to get those documents to them?
We were talking about it.
So what I recommend is folks online to contact the church office, Beth, to get we checked, there's a legal rule. Photocopies of this.
You can certainly come pick one up.
I have,
Mark and Evie, you had a question earlier?
That was my question.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Susan, or,
I will be buried in the columbarium with my late husband, and I wonder if your discussion is going to include any advice about whether organizations like, I can't remember the name of it, that you make arrangements ahead of time for them to take care of the inurnment, not an inurnment, but the gosh, I'm not coming up with the words I need. The actual you know,
That was too weak.
Care for the body.
Susan, can you repeat your question?
I'll ask it next week. I can't come up with the words I need. There's an organization that you can arrange for the actual what's it called, instead of being we're having a regular burial.
Cremation?
Yeah, that will take care of the actual cremation, and you arrange with them ahead of time, and you pay for it ahead of time. I just wonder if you have advice about whether to use such an organization or to have your family take care of that.
Okay, so your question is,
I'm sorry.
let me see if I can understand what your question is. So are you asking whether it would be better to figure all of that after end of life stuff planned out beforehand, or let it happen after you passed?
Yeah, and I just wonder if you have any experience with what that looks like for people that have actually made those arrangements ahead of time. Has that worked well for them, or
Yes.
I would say yes. Yeah, I hear some other people saying yes too, so please feel free to share your stories. But I think some of the families I've encountered, specifically at Bethany, more so than the hospital, a lot of times those arrangements have been made. A person knows where they're going to want to be buried. Maybe their spouse or their parents have gone before them and they want to be buried in the same place. So they just automatically make those plans and put them into place so that when the time comes, the family that is left and grieving doesn't have to make those decisions. Yeah, I think I heard a couple like ecstatic yeses over here. Do you want to share your stories and your reasonings for why you said yes?
When my mother was in hospice, they provided a name of an organization where you can sign up. The rate was reduced. And we signed him up, and it was very smoothly taken care of. And then we just went ahead and signed up my mother, and we're also signed up. So it's all in place. It's for a guaranteed rate.
Yeah.
is that Neptune?
What? Can you say that again?
Is that organization called Neptune?
I think it's similar to Neptune. I don't think it is the Neptune Society.
You can do it with, for example, my dad died in Texas, but it's mostly national companies now that really own the services. Dignity is both the one out here and the one I used in Texas. And so I signed him up for a funeral before he died because he had been taken. So when he died, I had someone to call and they could come, and it was decided they could pick him up. I mean, it was decided. Exactly. Made it so much easier on the family. I can use that same national firm and have been done so for my mother here. So when that happens, even though she'll be interred back in Texas, they can make that happen.
That's good.
And for people who don't have these arrangements, they are trying to make hard financial decisions at the worst moments possible. Not when they can think and look around and all that.
It's also
Thank you.
important that people share their wishes. We just had a deal with the columbarium where the family had a burial, and the congregation member had actually purchased a columbarium. So, and that was fairly recently. So
they had to, and yes, you need to not put them in the safe deposit box. You need to have them where people know to find them.
Absolutely, and I will actually say there is a note within the 5 wishes document that says that.
Yeah.
Do not put it in the safety deposit.
No.
Oh,
Put
no.
them on the door.
Any other questions?
I know you.
Any questions that I didn't talk about today that we can talk about next week?
that's a good point.
No?
Great shot of the Matterhorn and the Morley Ridge.
Have you climbed that one too?
Well, as I send you off to enjoy the rest of your Sunday, just some resources. Like we've said multiple times, this is not an easy conversation. Death is hard. We are losing some people that we love. I encourage you to find grief counseling, either in the midst of it or after, even when you're anticipating grief. That is a huge word. Huge thing we talk about within the chaplain world is anticipatory grief. Most of my role is walking people through that stage of grief as they are anticipating the death of a loved one, as they are anticipating all of these decisions that need to be made. That's usually where I sit with people. That is also a great place to have counseling. Not just after someone passes, but in the whole process of it. One other resource is whether or not someone is at the hospital, or more importantly, if they're at home, maybe look into caregivers. And that's a choice that you and your family make for yourself. But I have had some conversations and interactions with people where they were the caregivers and found it hard to actually be the child of grieving the loss of their parent. So sometimes it's good to use the resource of in-home caregivers to provide that support so you can be the family member. Does anyone know what palliative care, and most of you know what hospice is, but palliative care specifically? Yeah. Okay. That's a great resource. Hospice is a great resource. Palliative care is available from the moment of a diagnosis, often a terminal diagnosis. They're not the ones that say, hey, I'm here, let's talk about death. They're here to help figure out quality of life, really to help parse out all of these questions we've already talked about. What is important to you? What matters to you? What is meaningful to you? How can we translate that to the medical teams? They're also a part of the curative treatment. So palliative care coming into your healthcare journey doesn't necessarily mean end of life. Whereas hospice is within that 6 months left of life, and they really help with the comfort, with caring for you in those stages of life. The first 2 wishes, the one about the healthcare advocate and the one about your medical treatments, really, I'm going to say is outside of my expertise. That is a bit more of the legal side. Filling out wills, filling it out advanced care directives, I can help walk alongside that. But I recommend using resources of lawyers and legal advice, because that really is the important aspect of those wishes. And then I also have a book. There's a ton of resources, book-wise, article-wise, even movie-wise, that talk about all of this. The one I'm going to mention today is called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. He is a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, who comes from India but does his practice here in the US. So he has experienced life and death in both cultures, And his book really talks about the differences and what he sees as the benefits of end of life in India versus the benefits of end of life in America, and really what is important about it. Highly, highly recommend this book. There we go. I look forward to continuing our conversation next week. If you have questions throughout the week, please send them to Deb, and Deb can forward them on to me. I'd love to know what I can bring next week that would help answer whatever is percolating in your minds. Thank you.
Thank you.